I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. The Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers on July 27, 2023 will come to order. All managers are present except Manager Hajmati, who is participating or observing remotely, and Manager Loftus, who will join us in a few moments. I see no members of the public who aren't here for a specific agenda item. So item number 3, which is approval of the agenda.
Move approval. Second.
Motion for Manager Miller, second for Manager Maxwell. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the consent agenda, we have approval of the July 13th board meeting minutes. And the general checking account, surety checking account, wire transfers. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Manager Miller moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando second. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I don't have meetings to report on this evening, save that I did all attend the Metro Watersheds meeting. So I'll turn to you, Manager Miller's report on the planning and policy committee.
We had a presentation on diversity, equity, and inclusion by the staff, and it's an ongoing development of a program and policy and procedures. It was well received and will be, it's a work in progress that will be taken up again by the committee and next month.
Thank you. Manager Olson, Metro Watersheds.
Thank you. During the meeting of the Metro Watersheds, Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District did a relatively extensive presentation on their resiliency program, where they surveyed all of their culverts, their weirs, their dams, and any kind of a berm that is part of their flood control efforts. And when you see their maps of how many of those elements are there, it's quite impressive. And then they have taken that and they've built a program around it and helped focus on where they can make improvements. The other thing is that we had a strategic plan update with a newsletter from the Minnesota Watershed Association, and then the climate issues were also discussed from Bowser. Justin Hansen presented the $12 million that they're going to allocate for climate adaptation, and an additional $79 million was approved by the state legislature for the next biennium. So there's quite a bit of program funding that they're going to be offering everybody. There were quite a few groups that did not attend, and the meeting concluded on time. Thank you.
Thank you. Manager Loftus, Citizens Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. We met with a small but mighty group of CAC members, and our district administrator went through the 2024 budget, preliminary budget, and then also the external work plan document that was in draft form. The CAC had lots of great feedback on how the narrative is supportive of our goals and our partnership intentions, and had some good recommendations on making some meaningful connections to the budget numbers in that narrative. So I believe that will make its way into a future draft at an upcoming budget document that the board will see. So we're kind of in the middle of budget process, and they gave some great feedback. I did ask if they had any information or requests to send back to the board at this point, which they didn't. They seemed very engaged and very connected to the work that the board's currently doing. So I think it was very positive, and I'm grateful for everyone's time and effort that they put in, all the CAC members. So
Thank you. Our upcoming committee and board meetings are listed in the agenda. We'll move now to item 10.1, which is permit 22-553. The order here will be that staff will present, and then Mr. Yelsey will be allowed to present. Welcome to present, and then the board will take everything under consideration. Once we have a motion, then the board will be free to ask questions of the city, our staff and consultants, Mr. Yelsey. So I would ask Mr. Jonas, ask you to come forward.
Good evening, President White and Board of Managers. Tonight, I will be providing a briefing on permit 22553, the Strawberry Lane Reconstruction Project that takes place along Strawberry Lane, Strawberry Court, and Peach Circle in the city of Shorewood. This application is before the board this evening due to resident request. That resident, Mr. Yelsey, who lives on Peach Circle, is here this evening and will be speaking briefly about their concerns at the end of this presentation. I will also note that Andrew Buddy is in attendance this evening on behalf of the city of Shorewood and can assist with answering questions if needed during the discussion portion of my presentation. This presentation will provide an overview of the project location, and proposed development, as well as rule compliance and an overview of the residents' concerns. The presentation will end with time for questions and discussion before board deliberation. The yellow icon on the map is the project location in relation to the entire district. As you can see, the entirety of the project sits within the Lake Minnetonka sub watershed. The project itself is located within the city of Shorewood, and it extends south from West 62nd Street north to Smithtown Road, crossing the Lake Minnetonka Regional Trail at the approximate midpoint of the project. Project areas north of the Lake Minnetonka Regional Trail are referred to as Strawberry Lane North. And project areas south of the Lake Minnetonka Regional Trail are referred to as Strawberry Lane South. Drainage in the Strawberry Lane North area includes approximately 45 acres of land west of Strawberry Lane and north of the Lake Minnetonka Regional Trail. Within this area, there are two existing stormwater management facilities located on the west side of Strawberry Lane, on the northwest and southwest side of the intersection of Strawberry Court and Strawberry Lane. Water from this area drains to these basins. From those ponds, water then discharges east via a 12-inch pipe into Pebble Creek. During large storm events, runoff from this western watershed is reported to overtop the existing roadway. 12 homes within this area are reported to have less than 2 feet of freeboard during 100-year storm events, and 1 home is reported to have low openings at risk during 100-year storm events. Drainage in the Strawberry Lane South area includes approximately 18.8 acres of land west of Strawberry Lane and south of the regional trail. Runoff from this area ultimately drains east via an 18-inch storm sewer. The runoff then drains north towards the Freeman Park area, which receives runoff from an additional 106 acres. It then discharges through an outlet control structure under the regional trail, where it ultimately discharges into the Freeman Channel towards the Grant Lorenz Channel, which runs in parallel with Grant Lorenz Road. The area then drains north in the channel along Grant Lorenz Road up to Noble Road. Severe erosion is seen along the channel, and the intersection of Grant Lorenz and Noble are temporarily inundated during 10 and 100-year events. Culvert damage is also seen at the road crossing. To address these issues, Shorewood acquired land and built stormwater ponds to detain water and slow down rates. The Smithtown ponds were reviewed by the board on January 13th of 2021 and approved. The ponds have shown a reduction in rates for the Grant Lorenz Channel of nearly 40%. The Freeman Park Basin has 2 outlets, one to the Freeman Channel and one to the Smithtown ponds that we can see here. This design ensures that any runoff producing an event smaller than a 2-year design storm maintains flow to Freeman Channel. Also, any runoff producing event greater than a 2-year design storm ensures that Freeman Channel first receives the full 2-year flow, and then the overflow goes to the Smithtown Ponds for treatment. This design maintains base flow and ecological function within an intermittent channel and reduces risk of damage both to property and ecological health by mitigating artificial high flows being transmitted downstream. So knowing the details of the Smithtown Ponds and the area's existing drainage patterns is important because this road reconstruction project is connecting to them to treat their stormwater runoff. This road reconstruction project extends approximately 2,600 feet of Strawberry Lane between West 62nd Street and Smithtown Road and proposes to widen the road from 22 to 26 feet, add a 6-foot sidewalk on the east side of Strawberry Lane, install curb and gutter, and improve drainage in the corridor. Peach Circle and Strawberry Court will also be reconstructed. The proposed roadway improvements will increase impervious surface by 0.7 acres. Water main improvements are also proposed. Existing water main in Strawberry Lane South will be reconstructed and new water main is proposed in Strawberry Lane North. The project also includes maintenance work on one constructed ditch along Church Road and 2 existing stormwater management facilities located on the west side of Strawberry Lane at Strawberry Court. This maintenance will include the excavation of 100 cubic yards of material from the basin to the north of Strawberry Court, 180 cubic yards of material from the South Strawberry Court Basin, and 50 cubic yards from the ditch. Included in this project is the construction of a 48-inch, 740-foot storm sewer, which will convey water west from Strawberry Lane under Pebble Creek to the Smithtown Ponds for water quality and rate control. You can see that in orange there. So now that we've gone over the project's location within the district and the proposed development of the site, I'll review each of the district rules triggered and how the proposed project meets their requirements. For the rule analysis, staff have reviewed the permit application and determined that the proposed project triggers the district's erosion control rule, stormwater management, water body crossings and structures, and stream bank stabilization rules. Each has been reviewed in accordance with the criteria of the rules. So first, erosion control. The district's erosion control rule applies to land disturbance of at least 5,000 square feet of excavation, fill, or stockpiling on site of at least 50 cubic yards of soil or earth material. The applicant is proposing 7.3 acres of disturbance and 7,126 cubic yards of excavation volume. Therefore, the rule is triggered. Based on a request from the applicant, the district issued an erosion control permit for the demolition of the existing road on May 18th, 2023. The applicant met the intent and criteria of the erosion control rule by providing an erosion and sediment control plan and a stormwater pollution prevention plan that indicates best management practices. BMPs like perimeter control, rock construction entrances, and inlet protection are present around the project site, and staff find that the requirements of the erosion and sediment control rule have been met. Now for the water body crossings and structures rule. The district's water body crossings and structures rule is applicable to projects that propose to place a road, utility, bridge, or associated structure in contact with the bed or bank of a water body, beneath the bed or bank of a water body, and includes the alteration of water body to enclose it within a pipe. Here in orange, again, we see the crossing for this project. The applicant's contractor has installed the 48-inch storm sewer between Strawberry Lane and Smithtown Ponds. Because this included a subsurface crossing of Pebble Creek, it required a water body crossings and structures permit, and so was not authorized under the issued erosion control permit. Therefore, after the fact approval is being sought as part of this application. The conveyance as an element of stormwater treatment for a public road project meets the criteria of public benefit. Additionally, the road reconstruction will widen the road and add a sidewalk, improving safety and accessibility in the area. Additionally, the pipe installation did not affect water quality, hydraulic capacity, or wildlife passage capabilities. And there is 3 feet of separation between the bottom of the bed and the top of the pipe, thus meeting the requirements of the rule. Moving on to the shoreline and stream bank stabilization rule. This rule applies to projects that are proposing an improvement or alteration to the shoreline or stream bank. In addition to installing a pipe below the creek, the city is proposing improvements to the channel. This rule requires the applicant to assess the shear stress at that location and submit construction details for the disturbance, a stabilization plan, and a maintenance plan. Shear stress calculations done by the applicant identified that this area is a low erosion intensity, which then requires that they use vegetative stabilization. In accordance with this section of the rule, the area will be stabilized with erosion control blanket and seeded with a native riparian mix that is commonly used for ecological restoration, meaning this rule is satisfied. Moving on to the stormwater management rule. This rule is applied to projects that propose to create or replace impervious surface and requires the applicants to submit stormwater management plan for approval. Requirements are based on site size, percent site disturbance, and change in impervious cover. The project proposes to reconstruct 2.8 acres of existing impervious surface and add 0.7 acres of new impervious surface for a total impervious surface in the area of 3.5 acres. The project is defined as a linear reconstruction project that increases impervious surface between 10,000 square feet and 1 acre. And because of this, the project will require phosphorus and rate control for the additional impervious surface. Labeled here, you can see the ponds that are proposed to treat the runoff from the Strawberry Lane project. To meet phosphorus control, existing and proposed runoff models were provided to the district for review. After analysis, it was determined that the post-construction condition will reduce phosphorus loading to Lake Minnetonka by 7.2 pounds per year, meeting the rule requirement of not increasing phosphorus loading downstream. The rules also require that peak runoff rate for the 1, 10, and 100-year storm events may not increase at any point of discharge across the site boundary. As previously stated, the northern Strawberry Lane area will drain directly east to the Smithtown Ponds via pipe for treatment, and the southern Strawberry Lane area will drain northeast to the Freeman Pond. In both instances, the runoff is enclosed in a pipe as it leaves the site boundary on its way for treatment at the regional facility. The district engineer has reviewed the proposed plans, stormwater models, and stormwater calculations and determined that the project will not increase peak runoff rates during the 1, 10, and 100-year storm events. The project as proposed is in conformance with the requirements of the rule. So now we've reviewed the geography of the project as well as the district rules that are triggered. In this next section of the presentation, I'll be providing an overview of Mr. Yelsey's concerns and speaking about the analysis that district staff and engineers have done to address those concerns.
Before you go in, how many pounds phosphorus?
7.2. So Mr. Yelsey's concerns can be broken down into 3 broad categories. First being that the applicant's approach to project design relies heavily on models rather than utilizing field monitoring data. Second is that the Smithtown ponds have damaged and will damage ecological integrity at a system scale by changing local hydrology due to diverting a portion of flows to Smithtown ponds. And lastly, he's expressed concern about insufficient erosion and sediment control measures on site. District staff have conducted 4 site visits, met with Mr. Yelsey at his home, and walked the site with him in the city to understand and address his concerns. Following that, staff worked closely with the engineering team to review and address the concerns and offer the following with regards to the questions raised by Mr. Yelsey. In response to his modeling concerns, there's an extensive scientific research that provides literature values for modeling inputs, which have been validated and tested over time with monitoring data to ensure accuracy. Additionally, these models are widely used across the region and state, adhere to standard engineering principles, and are consistently accepted by public agencies to support the basis of project design and regulatory review. Moving on to his broader concern on the ponds. As I've already briefly touched on, the Freeman Park has 2 outlets, one to Freeman Channel and one to the Smithtown Ponds. This design ensures that any runoff producing an event smaller than the 2-year design storm maintains flow to the Freeman Channel. And then anything greater than that also provides flow to the Freeman Channel, but with just excess going into the Smithtown Ponds for treatment. The Smithtown Ponds and the Freeman Park Basin are wet detention basins, which include an added water quality component of an iron enhanced sand filter bench. The ponds will promote particulate settling, and the iron enhanced sand filter will capture both dissolved and particulate phosphorus load. The ponds are designed to slow flow of water through the system, which allows them to provide nutrient removals via settling and reduce peak discharge rates, in turn reducing the erosion potential within receiving waters. The ponds are not designed to remove volume. Lastly, Mr. Yelsey had general concerns regarding the erosion and sediment control being used on site. District staff have conducted multiple inspections, including one involving the city staff and Mr. Yelsey. Overall, the site has followed best management practices for sediment and erosion control, and the city has responded to any necessary corrections identified by the MCWD. Generally, the site has had sufficient perimeter controls, inlet protection, a construction entrance, and has stabilized any large areas of exposed soils. There have been some instances where repairs have been requested, such as a down silt fence or other sediment controls, a lack of rock construction entrance, and insufficient ground stabilization, but the city has been quick to address any repairs or installations. In summary, this project triggers the erosion control, stormwater management, water body crossings and structures, and shoreline and stream make stabilization rules. District staff, with the assistance of the district engineer, find that the proposed project with the recommended condition of pond permit issuance meets applicable requirements under these rules. Staff recommends approval of the permit application with the conditions listed at the beginning of the report. So thank you, President White and managers, for listening to this briefing on permit 22553 and the resident concerns. Unless you have immediate questions for me, I will now turn it over to Mr. Yelsey to present briefly prior to discussion.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
may come forward, Mr. Yelsey. Welcome.
Thank you. First, a couple points of order, just so I know what you expect from me. So do we have a time limit for me to talk?
Yes, 5 to 10 minutes.
All right. And are we able to talk to each other, or is it just a presentation? Will you
Make a
ask?
presentation and then during the board's deliberation, you maybe ask questions.
All right. I've got 20-something slides and I can't possibly cover that in 10 minutes, but I will do something to make this work. So I have a background. I used to head up systems research at Honeywell's top secret laboratories, and I've worked at the Metropolitan Council. I'm quite familiar with some of the systemics and the operation of a governmental entity like yours, just in background. I just want you to know that. So this is based not on my personal issues of my home specifically. This is based on scientific principles, on ethics, on basic best practices and how to conduct engineering in a wetland and a watershed. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm just going to go as quickly as I possibly can, and I'm not going to read all the words. You're supposed to be protecting the water resources of my area, which is a very large watershed that runs from Highway 7 all the way to Lake Minnetonka. And it's interconnected, and it runs basically south to north. And it feeds the wetlands and the watershed area below Lake Minnetonka. And for me, it's a precious one. I have lived in that area. I'm the only person who's watched that for 40 years. I've lived on both ends of that spectrum. I've lived right by Lake Minnetonka, and now I live upstream in the area near what's called Freeman Park, which is just the beginning of the Smithtown Ponds project. So I've had 40 years to witness this. So my comments are based on that. And your principles, I'm looking for innovation, I'm looking for sound science, and I'm looking for measurement, which is part of sound science, and I'm looking for ecological integrity. So I believe the Strawberry Lane project that we're talking about, including my street, which is Peach Circle, is inextricably linked with the entire region. That entire area is one big interconnected watershed, and that watershed depends upon the flow of water from south to north in order to be healthy. And it has, over the years, had systemic, I wouldn't call it flooding, but systemic flow in the spring that feeds the watershed and the wetlands just south of Lake Minnetonka. That's the way it has been for 40 years. And for me, that's the way it should be, because that's what that wetland requires, is that recharging. And it also is a very low lying area, flat, and it has quite a bit of a high water table as well. So moving on, I don't believe any permit for this project should be allowed because of the reasons I'm going to give you. And I believe it should be delayed. I believe there's work to be done. And I believe there's credibility that needs to be established that has not been established for this project. It is not enough to simply get a permit. You need to do the measurement, confirm that the submission information is accurate and correct and scientifically valid. And you need to also, if you're in the business of monitoring after issuing a permit, you need to monitor to make sure everything's going the way you need to, and also have measures so you can tell whether something's going bad, something's going good. So none of these, not one of these measures has been taken that I'm aware of directly by anybody. So we're talking about water flow, rates, sediment, erosion. There has not been any continuous, reasonably scientific pre or post or current measure of any of these variables for this entire ecosystem, which is just, I'm incredulous that is the foundation for all of this work and for the permitting and for my own city. And very quickly, my city is being run by a private engineering firm by and large, outside of the oversight primarily of the city, since they're running pretty much roughshod. And it's as if we have a private developer doing all of this, with us having very little say and very little ability to have a voice in what's going on. I got to keep moving. I'm going to run out of time.
Madam Chairman, can we make sure that he has enough time, because he's done quite a bit of work on this preparation of this report, and we don't have that many objections from the public to recommendations. So I think it'd be educational for the board to listen to this whole presentation.
I'm going to stick to the time that I gave, but by all means, ask questions during our discussion. Go ahead.
So I'm going to use that as a comment then. So the process of democracy in your institution, having been in one just like it, is suspect, because I could not receive the data I requested for this via electronic form with no cost. This is the data that should be posted on your website so I can access it when I need to and not have to ask for it to come in to your offices. And with that said, everyone has been very polite, very professional. So your entire staff has been just great. But this is about democracy. You're limiting, you've had how many hours of presentation on these projects, and here I am, the only voice speaking with firsthand knowledge, and I'm limited to 10 minutes. I just believe that's anti-democratic, and I believe because we're taking this audio tape, I will pass this on. My own town refuses to allow us to talk very long either. So it's unfortunate that's the way it is, and that's the priority for citizen voices. So I'm not even going to read all of these. These are the violations of the city of Shorewood based upon your rules, and I will list the rules in just a moment. But every one of these is a specific rule violation, and I can answer questions about each and every one of these. If you do ask questions, I will not have time to go through them all. There's enormous number of permitting violations, in my view, in terms of all sorts of scientific considerations, including no consideration for the removal of 2,000 trees and no restoration of 2,000 trees that are removed in this lowland area. They're just gone, and there's room to be able to put them back. You guys are supposed to encourage the development of restoration properties and also use natural, bring it back to a natural structure, which is trees and grasses, etc. So none of that is happening, and so I can't even go through all that. So let me just go on to the specific violations. So here are your specific rules, and I'm following them, reading them specifically And I look at these and everyone in red is a specific violation of your rules where you're not doing something that's required by the state law, or you're breaking a rule that is one of your rules. And they're listed right here, and I'll show you pictures of some of these violations in just a little while. And again, I encourage you to ask questions. If you want to understand these, I'm happy to present on every one of these. So, but the biggest one is there's no measure of any of this. So we're talking about, has there been flooding in that area? No, there has not documented been long-term flooding except for spring melt. And that's only for a period of a week or so, and that's resolvable with local action. There is no measure of sediment flow. There is no measure of erosion. There is not a major erosion issue. Has been no flooding issue on Strawberry Lane that I'm aware of, having lived there for 12 years and having been right by it there for 40 total years. None. This is a low-lying area, and the pockets of heavy clay hold water on properties, and that's not flooding. That's simply something that can be resolved by local landscaping. Here are the bulk of the violations. So we weren't asked for signatures, even though we are required to provide our signatures for the Strawberry Lane project by your rules. Not all the water bodies interconnected here have been identified. Can't go through them all again. I'm going to run out of time. But particular topsoil was removed, not replaced. Compaction all over the place, not resolved the way you're required by your rules. Excuse me. Slope length is greater than 3 by 1 in a variety of areas, which is going to allow erosion, etc. So I'm sorry. Excuse me. So let's go to some pictures. So this is the creek right now. Nothing. It just rained. I just took the pictures today and took some others, and I went over there yesterday too. There is no water in that creek except for just some standing water. It's not flowing, nothing. The creek, after a 1-inch rain, would have flowed in my 40 years. That's passed right past my home. That's what happened for 40 years. Doesn't flow anymore because it's captured in the ponds and redirected. Here's another picture from the other direction. And by the way, in this picture, you can see the compaction. So all those areas have been compacted by a roadway. They've not been fixed. They're not going to grow anything there. And no one has restored it, even though your rules require it to be restored. And you can see there's no erosion control there either that's required by law for baffling, for example. No baffles. Here's another example I took yesterday. No baffle by that is what's called Pebble Creek. You can see the top area there. That is a baffle on that's the west side of that creek. The south side has no baffle. And yet there is broken soil. It's been destabilized, and there is no baffling on the east side, which is quite baffling to me. It's a violation of your rules. This is erosion that I pointed out. City has not made any reference to fixing this problem, but there's water from feed into the upper pond, and it is eroding that soil, and it's getting into the pond. And if that pond does flow, it's going to have high sediment, and those ponds you can see are already filling up. And they're nasty, they're dirty, and they're full of feeded material already. Here's an earlier example of that same stream, and there's the erosion going into the pond, and that's with a free flow stream running during the spring. That breaks your rules right there. Shouldn't allow a feed into your stream to be full of soil and sediment. There should be baffling placed. Here's another example. That's the feed for the stream. No baffling, no protection whatsoever during construction, none. I'm not going to talk about all those. Here's again an example of compaction, uncorrected. Nothing's going to grow. And it's right by the stream. This is the channel that runs from Strawberry Lane to Smithtown Ponds. They are interconnected in my view. They can't be separated. You can see that they're interconnected and they should be considered as a whole when you're looking at the vitality of the region. There's an alligator in that pond already. Do you see it? No, that was a joke. No alligator. But that entire ecosystem there has been taken out, being replaced maybe with some grasses, but that's in violation. That is not being restored. This is a wetland. Those trees, the 2,000 that were removed, need to be replaced so that we have more absorption capability. Again, more unbaffled erosion right in the creek that's running during the spring. And then here's the creek running. There's a home right by it that's too close. There's the gasoline and whatever from the driveway there feeding into that stream, and it's unbaffled at that time. It has since been baffled on one side at least, maybe the other. I haven't been there to see. So I'm going to stop there. I think I've probably run out of time.
Some conclusionary, wrap it up, that's fine.
Sure. What I would say is that there is no solid foundation for the scale of these projects and the fact that they are going to be successful in nurturing the wetlands and watershed, which is your job. So there is no evidence that they're working at this time for the ponds. There's evidence that I presented to you that they're not working and they're actually cutting off the essential flow of water from south to north into this wetland. They're not properly adjusted, but we have no evidence. And so for you, you can issue a permit if you feel you have to, but if you don't monitor it and have measures, you're not able to do the scientific evaluation to see if indeed you've done something good or bad for the entire vast wetland. And my theory is that we've done something very bad that is unnecessary and harmful. And had we done more localized solutions, we would be much better off, particularly with your objectives, all of your objectives.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments and your concern for the organization, for the area. I'll let you resume your seat and then we'll go forward.
All right, thank you.
I got a question. What, if we do approve the permit, what kind of safeguards would you want to see on the permit to make sure that it is performing as prescribed?
Manager Miller, I'm going to hold your question and let you ask it during discussion. Mr. Yelsey will stay available.
Thank you.
Is there any further information that staff or city engineer would like to present this time?
There is not. We can move towards discussion or questions now. Thank you.
I would like a motion to approve the permit subject to the conditions stated in the report.
So moved.
Manager Olson moves. Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Thank you, Manager Maxwell. Manager Miller, go ahead.
I wanted to know what, I mean, this is not just a typical resident concerned about something changing. He's got some legal and scientific concerns. I think well-prepared presentation. I like to hear what he would like to see us attached to the permit so that we know that it's performing as required by law and in the permit.
Mr. Yelsey, if you'd like to come forward and answer his question.
Certainly.
Thank you for that question. I'll answer it as quickly as I can, but I'd like to cover the key points. Number one is we have an engineering firm, which is a for-profit firm that's earning by the end of this year, $6 million in strictly engineering fees, which is an outrageous number without any significant oversight by my town. So number one is if you're looking at validation, verification measures to be done by a third-party engineering firm that has no relation to the current engineering firm, and the contract would be not led by the engineering firm. So some neutral third-party engineering evaluation by a trusted party, number one. Number two is I would establish pre and post measures if they're available. So if indeed there was no flooding, then what are we trying to solve? If there was no erosion of any significance that couldn't be solved by local issues, what are we trying to solve? So what I'd like to see is an immediate establishment of measures that we can use to see if indeed your objectives, your rules are being followed, and if all of the things that can damage the ecosystem of that area are monitored, we establish them if they haven't been established before, which they haven't. We would establish them at least now and see indeed what happens over the next few years and find out what happens when a heavy rain occurs to that entire watershed. Measure the flow, measure the rate, look at sediment, look at phosphorus. No one's measured phosphorus. You just use the models, and that's crazy. I have to tell you, it's insane when you're dealing with a real live ecosystem run by nature to rely solely on models. Doesn't make any sense if you're trying to be scientifically accurate about what's going on in that ecosystem. It can be helpful, but indeed, if you want to know whether there's a major flow in the stream, and you're not going to rely strictly on modeling, you're going to rely on real measures. So measures, and I can give you, other citizens in the town can give you measures that we'd like to see established, but also they would be in compliance with what you're trying to do. So all of the things that create a healthy watershed, those are the things we have no measures for in this entire project. So you can't possibly trust this city at this point to be doing something right if we have no measures of what's wrong, no measures if it's improved or will improve, and there are no corrective actions that you'd be able to take, because who's monitoring the corrective actions? Nobody. So my comment is, let's do this as a true scientific inquiry where we follow the science wherever it takes us. And if everything's wonderful, which I doubt, that'll be great. And if things are not going right, such as the water flow has been impeded and there's no water flow to replenish and recharge certain areas of this precious ecosystem, then we would adjust and make changes to it. But right now, there's no evidence that any of this works at all. And the stream is not running. And for Strawberry Lane specifically, I believe that should be interconnected with Smithtown Ponds and the entire area as you consider the issue of the health of this entire area, which is one system. It's not 5 different projects. It's projects that were unfortunately broken into little pieces, but it's one system that you have to look at if you're looking for the health and vitality of the area. So that would be my very simple, quick answer.
James, does this flow directly into the lake?
It does discharge ultimately into South Lower Lake through the wetland systems that Trey highlighted. So runoff from the northern portion of Strawberry Lane comes east under Strawberry Lane in the stormwater ponds, and then it discharges north into Grant Burns Channel, which you saw some pictures of where there has been, I think, to Mr. Yelsey's point, fairly well documented instances of erosion and road overtopping that goes up through Noble and then to the west into a large wetland complex and then ultimately makes its way into the lake. I wouldn't say direct, but yes, that's the downstream receiving water body.
There are other flows as well that you haven't mentioned that occur in this system. If you can, there may have been in the map, I don't remember, but there are other flows that feed into Lake Minnetonka also from this same area. For Strawberry Lane, the west side of Strawberry Lane feeds north and ultimately can get into Lake Minnetonka as well, even though it's not flowing through Smithtown Ponds.
So 2 major concerns, a third party and actual measurements.
That's right.
Thank you.
Of the key variables.
Thank you. You can read the tape. Do I have questions of Mr. Yelsey at this point? Otherwise, I'll let him go back to the seat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Not for Mr. Yelsey, but for staff. Have you seen this extensive list of detailed concerns before tonight?
We have, yes, he provided this list to us when we met with him at his home on site.
And of course, there's a substantial amount of information that's in the packet that came from Mr. Yelsey. Questions?
Just one other question for the attorney. he cited violations of our rules and state law. What's your view of that?
Mr. Smith.
And President Andrew Miller.
No, you have to push the button. There you go.
I think there are some allegations by Mr. Yelsey of erosion problems. The record in the report suggests that some of those have been identified and addressed quickly. I haven't done, and I'm not sure the staff have done a comprehensive current site assessment. They could speak to it, and if they identify factually that there are ongoing erosion control problems, we could speak to those.
And would you reiterate from your report why models are used?
Yeah, so models are used because, sorry, let's see here. Models are field verified and tested and brought back to actual monitoring data occasionally, and models are used on a system basis for a variety of regulatory reasons. I don't know if engineering wants to speak more specifically on that, but otherwise, yeah, they are verified occasionally by field data.
And it's an industry standard. Mr. Meehan.
President White managers, the models are based off field verification. So when they look at how water runs off, they do field tests to allow the data inputs that go into the models to be understood and essentially verified. So when we do use it, we're able to accurately model and understand how the system will react to the different situations that we have. Just like we verify Lake Minnetonka, the TMDL that we did for Lake Minnetonka. Those nutrients have been monitored and verified based on what we get for watershed load. We do a very similar approach on a smaller scale for some of these smaller sites that we have when we look at watershed resources.
Thank you. Mr. Yelsey.
Just a quick comment on that. There's seasonal changes in what happens on that creek, those creeks and that entire watershed. From spring melt to heavy rains to right now drought. Those are not modeled. No one's taken measures and captured seasonal changes over a period of years to understand the health of the lower Lake Minnetonka area that I'm aware of. I've never seen those measures, and I've never seen a flow measure of the actual flow over a longitudinal period, given certain variables that relate to rain events, et cetera, and snow events. So I would argue any reasonable scientist, the systemicists, would not agree that it is enough to simply rely on modeling. And one last comment, a lot of work I do is in medicine. We would not want our bodies to be evaluated for the health of our bodies strictly with modeling. We would want someone to actually take some measures and see how our heart is doing and see what we're eating, et cetera, and keep track of that stuff. We don't run medicine like that, and medicine, our bodies are a system, no different than the system that we're talking about now.
Thank you. Angela Loftus.
For staff, when we have an applicant such as Shorewood come in and present to us what they'd like to do, we do have our engineering firm, who's not the same as Shorewood's, review those plans, correct? And I don't know how specific or granular they get on concurring with the issue or concurring with the solution. But if you have a comment on that, and then obviously I see your rule analysis is that the applicant's meeting those requirements, but do you see any benefit in any other third-party engineering review? Or have we essentially done that as part of our regular application review?
Sure. So thank you, Manager Loftus. So as an application comes through, we coordinate with district engineers to review all of their standards. Most specifically, what triggers like water body crossing and stormwater is where we rely on district engineering the most to do the engineering. And to double check the models and the calculations and make sure they're correct and conforming to the requirements of our rules. I don't know if I can speak to whether a third-party engineer is needed to check monitoring per se, but from the scope of our rules, our engineers are reviewing and making sure they're also in conformance.
And in this circumstance, they concur with.
That is correct.
Does it make any sense to have ongoing analysis of the flow into the lake?
I'm not sure if I have the answer for that right now, if the ongoing monitoring is the solution on this. I don't know if engineer or anybody wants to chime in. I will say that we do trust the modeling that they are showing and that the phosphorus reduction is accurate and then the rate reduction is accurate in meeting the rules. But I think that's, I have.
Mr. Bean?
President White, Manager Miller, as we look at these systems and how they operate, we use a lot of evidence based in the field of where, say downstream culverts, how are they being, are they handling the flow that we have? Are we seeing erosion? Are we seeing sediment that comes out? As we look at this project and how it's looking to address the system as a whole by essentially helping reduce the rate of flow going down Grant Lorenz, how it's looking to treat the water quality going into Lake Minnetonka. How the system is set up will look to do that. It always does take time for the grain to show up, to be able to show some of that. We're working with many of our partners. It's a recognition that the city is also the owner of what is downstream. They own the pipes, they own the drainage channels. It's in their best interest to ensure that they're limiting any kind of potential damage, or they're limiting any kind of concerns they would have as far as additional loading, which is why cities are responsible to help manage as part of their MS4 permit. So they're being diligent to try to get ahead of some of this by implementing projects like this. And as we go and we do reviews of different loading situations like Lake Minnetonka, how much is going on, that's our way then when we come back and look at how these improvements make a difference on the watershed. Very similar to like what we're looking at with Lake Hiawatha, where we've noticed the district's projects over time have made a difference in the loading and how we see the concentrations in Lake Hiawatha. Very similar to that. If we started to see something out of the ordinary with our partners and how this project is working, we then would look to come in and evaluate that at that point in time. But right now, based on how they've set it up, it should be an adequate system to help improve the situation at hand.
Thank you, Mr. Bean.
I have no idea what the magnitude of the flow would be. Is it equivalent to a Long Lake Creek or Painters Creek or anything of that nature, or is it much smaller?
Mr. Bean?
President White and Manager Miller, it's much smaller than what we would see on Lake Creek. It's probably, I would have to say, 30% of some of the flows that we would see there. So it is a flow, but it's a much reduced flow compared to some of the larger channels that we see within the watershed.
Thank you, Manager Olson.
Do you know the approximate total budget for the project?
I do not. I may have to rely on Mr. Buddy for information on that.
Mr. Betty?
Construction was approximately $3.5 million for Strawberry Lane. And that doesn't include the Smithtown Pond projects that were built kind of a year or two prior. That was probably another $1.5 million approximately.
That's a permit that we approved previously.
That's correct.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, please. The project is addressing a road and the runoff produced by this road so that it does not have a chance to go directly to Lake Minnetonka. It will go through a series of constructed channelways, whether they be creeks or pipes, going to ponds, where the ponds will have not only the filtering capacity, but also the iron sediment in the ponds to take out dissolved phosphorus and produce a 7.2 pound per year of reduction going to Lake Minnetonka. So to me, this looks like a major effort on the part of the city to address the runoff pollution concerns of a road that they want to install in the community.
Thank you, Manager Olson. That's correct. Yes, the runoff will come off of Strawberry Lane. The northern portion of the project will drain directly east to the Smithtown Ponds.
Yep.
And the southern portion of the project will drain east and then north to the Freeman Pond before splitting between the Freeman Channel and the rest of the Smithtown Ponds.
Okay. Okay, and then related to flood control. Are we recognizing any part of this project as a flood control project? Or is it a project that filters water based on 1, 10, and 100-year storms?
It is regulating rate control. So it's based on the 110 and 100-year.
For a flow rate.
For a flow rate, correct.
So we're not putting in weirs.
I may, the top of my head, I'm not sure. I may rely on Mr. Buddy or our district engineer to chime in.
Mr. Buddy and then Mr. Mann.
We have some weirs in the outlet control structures that control the water elevation in the ponds, that's Smithtown Ponds, and that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Mr. Mann.
President White, Manager Olson, the system in place is to help address where they have some of these localized flooding issues to help provide conveyance mechanisms for them to be able to help get the water off some of these situations and then collect in the ponds. So what it's doing is it's helping create an efficient way for the water to get to an area where it can be treated and stored properly. And that's why we're seeing some of the control issues as far as being able to get the water down to the ponds being addressed by implementing the system through not only the road improvements, but also some of the pipe improvements. That they've done.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Is this a priority? Is this a priority on 1 to 10? I'm sure it's.
Is this a priority?
Yeah.
What is the priority? Is that what you're asking? I mean, this is a major priority for Shorewood. As it's indicated, we're investing a lot of money to try and improve a lot of drainage problems that are within this watershed. And so it is a very big priority. It's the top project at this,
That's that point, okay, for the city.
for the
That's the city as a whole.
yeah.
Okay, and that, just out of curiosity, just if we had a third party come in, how long would it take to do that? To give some answers.
Months, probably. I mean,
I just time wise, that's August, that's just kind of. Are you still gonna start this project this spring, fall?
It's
we technically have started it with the sediment and erosion control, so we've demolition the street and have started putting in some of our utilities.
It's really dug up. That sounds
Mr. Loftus.
Mr. Buddy, was there intention behind phasing it, so to speak? As in there was a 2021 approval and now there's some after the effect approvals and now there's new approvals? Or is there some gap in how, if we're looking at this system wide? Or can you explain what the thought process for Shorewood was?
Yes, the first goal of the city was to build the Smithtown Pond project because it allowed the Strawberry Lane Street project and some of the other infrastructure that's upstream to be built. And so we had to phase that first from a city financing and just process. We were okay doing that project a year or two ahead of time to kind of get that infrastructure in place. Knowing that this project was, or the Strawberry Lane project was coming down the pipeline, we would have the required ponding and sediment control, major sediment control items in place for that. As we got to earlier this spring, we realized there was still some process to get through this permit for the water body crossing and the stormwater. So we did request to have a sediment and erosion control permit kind of approved earlier this spring so that we could begin construction, because this project is big enough that it does take all year to construct. And it is next one of the city's goal is it's next to an elementary school, so our goal was to try and have it completed by September. For September 1st before school opens. So we were trying to manage the goals and the expectations of the city and some of the surrounding schools and how they were impacted by this project as well.
From our staff's perspective, did we lose out on any? Lose out on any analysis or opportunity by not being able to look at it holistically just based on the needs of the applicant, or is it just phased how it is and we would have ended up at the same point?
Mr. Whisker.
Thank you, Manager Loftus and board members. With regards to your question, did we lose out on anything by the decision the city of Shorewood made on phasing the project? I don't think so. I mean, I'm going to say that obviously the city's applied for an after the fact permit for getting into this pipe work under this erosion control permit, setting that aside for a minute. The Smithtown ponds were designed, conceived, designed and built as part of a comprehensive assessment of drainage in the western side of Shorewood, where the city hired Bar Engineering before Bolt the Mink as an independent third party to look at the entire city's drainage and understand, much in the way the district would do, what are the issues, what's driving them, and what are strategies. And they went through a comprehensive feasibility assessment, stacking up multiple options in terms of cost and benefit, but also impact on natural resources. And ultimately landed on the strategy of acquiring property on the north side of the Minnetonka Regional Trail to build a regional stormwater facility. It's not unlike the approach that the district would take to managing regional stormwater that has increased in volume, increased in rate, increased in pollutant profile over decades because the land area upstream's developed and it's been impacting the natural resources that are downstream. That plan came to the watershed district, I think Trey had mentioned, was permitted in 2021. That permit was heard in front of the board, I think, at the request of Mr. Yelsey, and these same concerns that you're hearing tonight were heard and considered as a matter of that permit decision-making process. And so we're hearing some of those again this evening. When the board reviewed the Smithtown Ponds project and the district engineer reviewed the modeling for that, it was always put forth from the city of Shorewood that there would be subsequent projects upstream that would be designed and built that would plumb into these ponds. Strawberry Lane was identified. They identified the approximate range of increased hard cover. They identified the location of the conveyance from Strawberry Court east into Smithtown Ponds. And so I would say that we did review it holistically because we looked at the projects that would be plumbed into it in the future and then considered the public comment at that time. And you got a lot of the same answers. There was one other thing that I was going to say, but now oh, that's right. So just in terms of the phasing, it's also worth noting that it's just the way the watershed district would approach regional stormwater management and it's actually included in our stormwater management rule is we don't allow people to build the project and then plumb and build the regional stormwater facility later. We actually encourage you to go through the comprehensive assessment, build the regional facility so that we know the treatment is there and then tie projects into it. So I think in terms of phasing from feasibility to how the permit was brought forward to now these subsequent permits, there's been a pretty strong logic chain that I've seen from the city. I mean, just other sort of editorial comments based on the discussion so far. The project generally follows the thought process the watershed district would use, and I would say has used for decades. That doesn't mean that there might not be issues, but they've assessed issues, diagnosed causes, planned solutions. Yes, they've used modeling. I think Trey and district engineer have spoken to that pretty extensively. You know, models are based on many studies that tie measured field observed values to models over and over and over again until they become industry accepted practices. And those models are based on understanding when you change land from trees to concrete, like what's happened upstream in the city of Shorewood, this is what you can expect in terms of increased volume on an average sample of storms over a calendar year, how the rates are going to change and how the pollutant load profile changes. So that the fact that modeling's used, is a part of project development, and we've seen time and time again that while models are imperfect, I agree with Mr. Yelsey, it's not measured field data. They're representative of how the system works, and we have used models to predict how systems have worked. We've seen those observations come true, and that's why we're systematically delisting lakes from being impaired and addressing water resource issues. In terms of the third-party review, so some of the conditions here that Mr. Yelsey was, asked to weigh in on would be measurement and third-party review. I'd say that after all of that work's done, the district is third-party review. Stantec is independent from Bolton and Mink. Bar before Bolton and Mink conceived of the strategy, so you've had 3 different civil firms look at this. By the time it gets to design, and Chris and his team and Stantec are looking at this, they're looking at native model files, plans, invert elevations. They're checking the model inputs for, well, are the times of concentration right? Are the curve numbers that represent the land use and the mosaic of hard cover and trees and roofs and driveways, are those appropriate? They're making sure that inside the math of the model, the invert elevations and the pipe diameters and the roughness coefficients match what's being proposed to be built. So I think the third-party review, for what it's worth from my vantage, that's one of the services that the district provides the public as projects are coming forward. The models are not a perfect representation of natural systems. That's not how they work, but that's part of the process. In terms of moving forward and for measured field data, I think the concern that I've heard from Mr. Yelsey in meeting with him out on site and receiving his notes and hearing him tonight is that the stormwater ponds are collecting drainage from 150 acres upstream that's been artificially developed, and volumes and rates have been artificially increased. Those aren't natural flows traveling through Grand Lorenz, but the concern has been that the flows are being split. And so 2-year flows are being diverted into Freeman Channel and then down, and then the rest of the flows are being throttled down and raced for Grand Lorenz. So in terms of, how can we make sure it's functioning as modeled and designed? I've talked to the city engineer, and they've assured us that they'd be providing us as-built, which are forthcoming for the stormwater facilities. And then, short of measuring the stream and having pre and post measuring flows, I think we could work with the city to set up some sort of regime where post runoff producing rain events, we're just doing observation to make sure that 2-year flows are going into that stream. And that would be a stepwise approach to, because these ponds have been reviewed, permitted, constructed. We should make sure that they were built the way that they were conceived, and then verify just through basic observation that 2-year flows are showing up in the channel. Obviously, we have pictures from Mr. Yelsey that are showing the channel dry. We are in a record drought. I'm not debating the potential that after a runoff event, there should have been rain there, but the first thing to do would be to just look at it. That's the approach that I would take. And I know that we want to be cognizant of the concerns that Mr. Yelsey's brought forward. I think we should respect the fact that he lives there. He's there all the time. He's boots on the ground. And so we've tried to go through his sediment erosion control issues, which I would view separate. They're a matter of field compliance and an active construction project, and tried to make sure the city's being responsive on some of those issues. But those are the steps that I would take, is make sure that we get the as-built and do field observation before you would, take the next step. And that's on the basis that those designs have been reviewed, those concerns have been heard, and the project's actually built. And that's not what's before the board for consideration this evening. So we are trying to take a holistic view, but as a matter of how projects come forward, we know how projects sometimes need to be phased over time and money and space. So probably a predictable long answer to a really short question.
Thank you, Mr. Whisker. Manager Miller.
This is interesting. It's very seldom that we have scientific based arguments against an action. I really appreciate the work that Mr. Yelsey's done on this. However, I think there's overwhelming evidence that the project is worthy of the approval. And I would like to abstain or vote against it, just to show my support for the hard work that Mr. Yelsey's done. But I think the case has been made for approving it.
Thank you. I'm certain the minutes can reflect that your comments too. Mr. Manager Sando.
Yes, I don't, there's trees yet to be replaced, or there's trees that should be replaced.
The primary, thank you, Manager Sando, sorry. The area of tree removal, is that stretch of where the pipe, extended from Strawberry Lane to the Smithtown Ponds. And right now it has not been, reestablished. It is stabilized with, hay blanket right now.
Trees will be.
It will be revegetated as part, of that. It'll be a seed mix. I'm not sure on the exact seed mix that it will be.
And maybe also if there's a concern of compacted soil, that's easy to rectify, isn't it?
It's something we'd be inspecting for. I know there are soil piles on site that I would assume would be laid out when they are ready to reseed and reestablish vegetation.
Thank you.
Because it's underway right now. Anything else before we vote, Manager Loftus?
I can see Mr. Yelsey's comments, but I just wanted to echo the tree comment. I know at other times, I don't know if in this circumstance, we require more than just native plantings, but actual tree replacement, but as someone who walks those trails in that area quite a bit, I do recall, just as my individual anecdotal observation, it being a stark difference when they started that project, clearing that whole area. It was a lot of tree work,
We, just to inform you, the city has planted nearly 200 trees within the Smithtown Ponds parcels already in and around the ponds. We had kind of, that requirement is part of the city requirement.
Okay.
Now, because it's a city infrastructure project, we're not required to, but we did hold ourselves to the same standard of what we would a developer in meeting our tree replacement policy. We did also have trees planted at the request of Three Rivers Park District and the Hennepin County Regional Rail, because we did have to remove some trees within their corridor, and so they wanted us to replace trees within their corridor, and those are already planted in the ground as well. On the Strawberry Lane project that we're actually talking about, there has been some tree removal on that. From the city's perspective, we don't love trees in the city right away because it starts to compromise the streets, sidewalks, and our utilities that are in there. But the city is committed to providing 2 trees to each resident that abuts the project. So that's about 50 residents and about 100 trees that the city would give to these property owners and allow them to plant within their property to help replant the area.
Manager Sando?
Just a suggestion is that during this drought, it looks like it's going to be long-term to water those trees. There's some other parts in our area that they neglected to water really planted trees and we're losing the trees. So just a suggestion.
Mr. Yelsey, you've had your hand blocked. Just a sentence or two. What would you like to say?
One sentence? Can I have 20 sentences?
No.
And I refuse to accept that as your process.
All right.
Why won't you listen to me if I have facts to present to this board? That's crazy. I'm sorry. And I'm gonna take this recording and pass it on. Why would you limit me to one sentence? Nothing I can say except what I just said. For one sentence.
Go ahead. Give your 20 sentences.
You want to count them?
No.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Yelsey, do you want to come to the front so that we can?
I'm too afraid. I'll stay back here.
We can't hear
We'd
you.
like to record.
I'm happy to.
The microphone is here.
You want to pass the tape along? Do you want to speak into the microphone?
Don't lose your goodwill now.
I'm just teasing. So you realize I've been through this process once before and was totally shot down.
This isn't our first pony ride either.
I know. So I have read every engineering report from Bar Engineering, from actually Wench and others on this entire region over the period of 20 years. I don't know who else has done that. There is no evidence that the problems that were stated exist, number one. Strawberry Lane never had any flooding. Strawberry Lane has, and we're all on some pumps in that area. The water table is extremely high. So you've built only 0.6 acres more of impermeable surface on Strawberry Lane, which is the permit you're considering now. That could have been less had the road not been widened. We didn't wish it to be widened. And the sidewalk could have been permeable instead of impermeable. And so there was negligible increase in runoff from that street. On that street, there are existing holding ponds, 3 of them in that area, that filter the water before they go down the channel of what's called Pebble Creek. And then they go into the watershed before they get to Lake Minnetonka. And it only runs variably with heavy rains and particularly in the spring melt. So there was no problem that I'm aware of that fits any of the criteria of your concerns for damaging the watershed, except for the fact that they decided to build Smithtown Ponds and divert this flow now to Smithtown Ponds, which is going to remove the flow down Pebble Creek and solve a problem that did not exist. And if you can show me, or anyone can show me, the problems that we're talking about existed, from flooding to erosion. 2 homes have erosion, and those could be solved by localized solutions, which no attempt has been made to do that for 20 years, even though it's the same erosion problem. And it still won't be solved by a small flow because erosion is in soft soils. So my comment and my summary is, there is no, first of all, I appreciate Mr. Whisker's comments. So thank you for those. And I agree with the majority of those comments, except for the idea that we can't do real-time measurement. And we also can't reconsider perhaps some misengineering of this whole area that is going to cause damage, untold damage downstream, and it's cost us an enormous amount of money. And lastly, trees. 1,000 mature trees roughly have been removed in these 2 projects. 1,000 mature trees. I'm not talking about the smaller ones. And those absorb an enormous amount of groundwater each year, and they take out carbon. And replacing them with these spindly little trees that's going to take 30 years to get back to that level is not going to replace them, and needs to be modeled in as to what the effect is going to be on our groundwater. Since we're all on sump pumps and we're on wells, we have no idea what's going to happen. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Yelsey. Are we ready to vote? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. Great deal of information. I don't, 11.1, Christopher.
Right. Thank you, President White and managers. Tonight, staff is requesting conditional approval of the City of Minnetonka's amended local water management plan. And just for reference, to start off, here's a map of the city boundary showing the portion that's within MCWD in tan. The city's plan was last updated and approved by the district in 2018, and the city is now proposing an amendment to incorporate updated flood modeling results based on a recently completed stormwater management models for the entire city. These changes are to reflect Atlas 14 precipitation and frequency estimates, as well as land use changes and infrastructure modifications made in recent decades. The amendment requires district approval to ensure that the plan still meets all the necessary requirements from rule and statute and the district's plan. In terms of the scope of the changes, they are generally limited to incorporating the new model data and outputs, including revised flood elevations. The city is not proposing changes to its capital improvement program as part of this amendment. And one of the next steps that they've outlined is that they will be developing a flood mitigation prioritization strategy that would then inform future updates to its capital improvement plan in its next plan update. And so in terms of staff's review, we've verified that the plan meets all of the requirements and really focus the review in on just trying to understand potential for downstream impacts as the city looks to address flood issues within their boundaries. And as cities across the district try to try to manage increasing precipitation with climate change. We know there's, potential for flood risk to be transferred downstream. And obviously, we're undertaking a 2D model build to get a better understanding of the cumulative impacts of these type of changes so that we can better understand how to manage them. And our approach really has been to work cooperatively with the cities to try to understand what they're seeing, what their models are showing, and kind of how they're approaching these changes so that we can be, a partner collaborating on the front end to kind of understand it at a system level rather than trying to address it when it comes through for a permit. And so the board may recall an amendment that came through for Edina, I believe was approved in December, where the city had also updated its modeling, gone through a prioritization strategy, and was actually implementing or incorporating new projects into their plan. And so we had some good discussion there with the city and ultimately asked them to make some additions in their plan to just acknowledge the potential for risk and our interest in working collaboratively to address those. And so I think, now seeing a similar approach here with the city, granted, they're not quite as far along and are still going to be kind of taking those next steps to prioritize and implement new projects. But nevertheless, we view this as an opportunity to just kind of open up those conversations with the city and, view this as a good opportunity just to acknowledge in the plan, our potential concerns and just desire to work collaboratively to understand potential for risks and work on those at both a system scale and a project scale. So staff has proposed some additional language that could be incorporated into the plan. And the city has been supportive of that and is willing to kind of finalize that language and get that incorporated. And generally, it would involve just acknowledging potential for downstream impacts and then expressing a commitment to work with the districts as they develop their flood mitigation prioritization strategy, as well as on a project specific basis as they look to advance projects that have potential for downstream impact, as well as in advising and engaging with us as we develop our 2D model and identify any potential regional opportunities that we might want to pursue with the city. So as I mentioned, the city is comfortable with those recommendations. And so the request tonight is for the board to approve the city's amended plan, condition on submittal of a final version that would incorporate the additional language. And I can take any questions.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution? Andrew Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando, any questions for Ms. Christopher? Then voting on this, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now moving to a presentation, 325 Lake Road Master Development, Mr. Heyman.
Good evening, Chair White, managers. I just want to give a quick introduction for item 12.1. Our master development partner, Alatus, Bob Lutz and Erica Miller are with us this evening. As noted in your packet, we've been working with Alatus since selection of them as our master development partner in June of 2021. And from the design charrettes through the preliminary development agreement, I've really been working closely to integrate the natural systems and regional stormwater with the master development itself. That vision was memorialized in our purchase and sale agreement in 2022 and is what we've been working towards with Alatus since then. Following about 12 months of working together on that, and as they near completion with phase 1A, the Chorus building, Alatus is here this evening to provide a development and market update and really further inform the board and take any questions as it considers potential extensions or other adjustments to the purchase and sale agreement moving forward. So with that, I want to turn it over to Bob and Erica to provide an update on the development.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, President White, managers. Nice to see you all again. What we'd like to do is give you an update on kind of the progress on our first building, and then give you kind of also an update on our progress on the future buildings and also the partnerships that we have on the senior co-op building and the townhome buildings. So maybe if we can start first of all on the building that we all attended the groundbreaking on last year, and now we're rapidly moving toward completion of that toward the end of this year. So with that, Erica, maybe you can give the update on the status of that building and the reservations that we experienced.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having us tonight, President White and managers. First of all, Chorus is going along wonderfully. It's set to be scheduled to be closed and finished by December 1st, construction to be complete and move-in starting shortly thereafter. So as of this week, we have over 126 interested parties for that building. And it's 116 units if you might recall. So very great progress so far on that building. And as you know, we have a couple of just a couple of issues in terms of the parking, which I think we've talked about in one of our asks of the board. But otherwise, the rest of the progress is coming along great.
Maybe we can walk into the next phases that
Yeah.
we're gonna be going into. So the concept that we had initially when we did the purchase agreement with you last year was that we would progress from building A to building C and D. And then building C is the larger, the 15-story building in the corner. Building D is the 5-story building that's adjacent to that. And then building E is the commercial building. We always anticipated that the townhomes, the 33 townhomes and the senior co-op buildings would follow at the end. The market, we're really kind of adjusting to the marketplace right now. Interest rates since the time that we did the purchase agreement have gone up, I believe something like 22 times since last March, and they went up again this week. The rate itself is troubling but we'll adjust in the development business. We always adjust to rates once they stabilize. The challenge that everybody's experiencing in the business right now is just the volatility that the lenders and the equity partners for large projects like this are unwilling to really extend themselves. The banks have a liquidity problem, although the smaller banks have liquidity problems where they just don't have money to lend right now. And the larger banks are kind of locked up as well because they don't want to be lending longer term, for a project like we'd be doing, and then have rates go up, and then they would look foolish is really what it amounts to. So once they stabilize, and we believe that we're getting close to that stabilized point, and we were hoping that possibly this last increase that occurred this week would actually be the last one. I think the momentum, though, of the economy continues to be positive, which seems weird that that's a negative in our business, but in fact it is, because it keeps on driving the Fed to continue to raise rates. So, or at least it continues to have disruption within the marketplace. So what we're doing right now is our entire team is kind of pivoting where we're still focusing on building C and D and still, taking meetings with lenders and capital sources. But we're now focusing on getting our senior co-op and the townhomes going. We've got 3 really qualified developers that we're working with on the townhomes that would be great. I mean, all 3 of them would be great. We've got offers on from one of them, and we're expecting offers from the other 2 here within the next week. We do have a purchase agreement already from the senior co-op provider that we want to work with. It's an acceptable offer, and we want to wait until we select our townhome developer to get those to be coterminous, so that we're running those through the city at the same time, because we're going to have to have their final plans go back through the city of Hopkins. And at that time, we're going to be taking our final building D plans through the city as well. And if you can, I guess, allow me to just talk a little bit about building D and what the kind of our decision points that we're making on that. If you remember, I apologize, we didn't bring any slides tonight because we didn't want to really do a in-depth presentation, but building D sits alongside to the commercial building. The commercial building originally was contemplated to be relatively small, like 4,500 feet, a possibility of 2 of them, so possible 9,000 feet. As we developed the concepts for the site, after we were selected, we really kind of fixated on the concept of a food hall on the site. We worked for a long time, about 7 months, with a food hall operator, a local operator, very high quality, great operator. who has now decided to go to another development over in St. Louis Park in the West End. We had in the office yesterday a food hall operator, one of the best in the country out of Atlanta, who is extremely excited about the project. We walked the site yesterday, which I don't know if any of you have actually walked the site, but down by the creek and over where your ponds are going to be, that site, it is beautiful. And the trees and everything, we've got to be very cautious not to eliminate trees. But it really is spectacular, but he's very excited. We had another conversation with him today. We're expecting that to move forward very quickly. The challenge that we're having is that we can't advance the plans for building D until we know the use of that commercial building, because we have to size the parking garage for building D by the use of that commercial retail center. Right now, we're planning on about 200 public parking stalls that would be in the base of building D, that in addition to the requirement for the building, and we're varying between 201 units and 244 units in that building. We prefer the 244 units, but you've got to do the math on that to get the parking. You've got to have approximately 1.5 parking stalls. So right now you're up in the 400 stalls for that, plus the 200 stalls. So it turns into quite a large parking structure. All of that said, I mean, there's a lot of sausage making here, but all of that said is that at the end of the day, we've got to decide, is that food hall the right solution for the site? And because it is going to be a burden to doing this parking on the site, we don't want to overdo the site either. There's a point that you can actually create too much demand on a site, and that wouldn't be good. So those are the challenges that we're trying to kind of methodically go through and make sure that what we have on the site is the right uses. So that's you're now into our thought process. And so from a timing standpoint, we will be exercising within the purchase agreement that we had designed with you guys last year. We had 2 extension periods. We've exercised 1 extension period and paid the fee on that. We will be extending the second extension period in August and paying the fee on that. We will be requesting another 90-day extension period. We were considering whether or not that needed to be longer at this time because of the pivot that we've done, where we're planning on having our 2 for sale products come in earlier. We believe that just one additional 90-day extension period will be adequate for us. We're working in real time in the marketplace, but that's what we're hoping for. One other item that we're going to be requesting is an access easement. So where the spine road that currently is on the site, that's just a gravel road, that road right now is approximately 6 to 12 inches below the actual height of the road, but it's in the correct location. What we would like to do is to have during these extension periods to have a coterminous access easement for us to be able to go through the site during that period of time. That would take us until approximately March of next year, so that as we're showing the site this next winter, and we have people going on the site, we'd like to be able to access it. That also gives us a buffer for the excess cars for building A, their chorus building, that they would be able to allow to park on the side of that road during the winter. We would maintain it, and we'll provide you, documentation, all of that. So we will be coming forth with that request as well.
Could you, I didn't follow the description of where that road is, the piece you're talking about.
There's a spine road that goes from Blake Road on Second, across from Second, through the site to Lake Street.
So it's part of that road?
It would be that road. It's the easement over that road. So we would plan to actually keep the roadway open during the winter. There's currently a chain link fence on kind of the south side or on the creek side of that road right now. When we're done with building A, we would plan to put a similar chain link fence on the kind of the north side or the west side of that road, so that people aren't, but there's not really anything to get in the way of or in trouble on that, but the road would actually be an open roadway. And we would maintain it.
Other questions?
How wide a road is it gonna be if you're gonna park on there, and then you still got the snow? Or you get parked at both sides of the road or just one?
Just
side?
one side, it would be
So it's still
anticipated.
gonna be over 20
Yeah.
more feet.
I think it's between, right now, I believe it's between 25 and 30 feet.
Mhm.
I just didn't want you to also tell me the 22 foot.
Yeah, no.
Right.
Manager Loftus.
Is the long-term plan for that road then to have on-street parking as well? So
Yep.
it's not changing that expectation.
Commissioner, there's currently, or manager, there's currently in the plan, there's 40 on-street parking stalls that would be allowed on that road. Within building D, we're also programmed to have an additional 50 stalls of structured parking that would be adequate for any overflow parking for the chorus building.
When would the food hall be started?
We'd like to have it open at the same time as building D. So we would try to get some of this to happen, so that there's logic to it. So that building D would open. If ideally, we would have the townhomes, the senior co-op and building D basically start at the same time or really close to the same time next spring. And then building E would follow probably 9 months to 12 months later, because that'll only take approximately, a year to build.
Yeah, I just.
We-
want to make sure, because I'm sure the food halls will wait for the customers to get.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's gotta be where it's at.
It- And
Thought it was the other way around. I was thinking, why would you want to build that food hall that quick with no customer base there?
correct. And Commissioner or Manager, they're also looking at, the fact that kitty corner across by the train station, light rail station, there's another 800 units going on over there. So the density of this area, we really do want it to be a destination. And if you, take a, summer or a spring day or a fall day and you introduce food to it and around your parkland that you're going to be creating, it will be an incredible experience. That being said, it may be the ultimate decision to not do a large commercial building on that site. That's what we're concerned about. We're putting a lot on the site, so that's what we're trying to measure. What's the right amount?
Because all the ones that Blake on Excelsior Boulevard are all in the 2 high rise you're talking about. There's commercial below.
There's commercial below there, but it's a parking. It's really comes down to parking.
Yeah.
Because to do the food hall correctly, the size and scale that they need, we really do need a minimum of 200 stalls plus the 40 on the street and potentially excess parking even in building C. And we don't want to strangle the neighborhood.
That's what I'm thinking, just
Yeah.
we want to overload the commercial because there's only so many customers.
That's,
Just cherry picking.
and
What's Plan D then?
Plan B would be, we're looking at a couple of different options, Manager. There's a great example over at Theodore Worth where they did, what's the name of it again?
Mill
Valley Market. In a community center kind of, so a pavilion of some sort, but a much lower occupancy pavilion would be another alternative. That would be also a nice experience. It wouldn't have the energy of what a food hall would.
You talk to the city yet about bonding for your infrastructure?
We've had
Infrastructure and some other stuff.
we have had preliminary conversations and they're open to they're receptive to the idea. Until we really get the rest of the project scoped out, we can't make the request. It's not, the timing wouldn't be right yet.
But they're okay with this temporary road, then if we're okay with this temporary road,
I believe that they would be. We would have to formally ask them. We haven't, yeah.
just for we're on the same page we're on.
Yeah.
It's not certain ever, is it?
No.
Buddy project. Should be good.
Thank you.
Something else, we just want to get our water going too.
No.
Working together. together to develop our water, because that's gonna be a big selling point for you, but it'd be a selling
Yes.
point for the whole community, along with the park right next to it. It all adds into one bigger picture instead of just frame by frame, so all in one picture.
It is, I mean, for our entire team, I mean, we're extraordinarily excited about it. And there never is certainty in this business. You don't expect rates to go from 0 to where they've gone to a 22-year high in a period of 1 year, basically since we signed the contract. And we're adjusting to that, but that is the business. And I don't lose sleep at night.
How does the progress here compare to some other projects? You have other projects going at the same time.
President White, it's a good question. We have 2 projects under construction right now and 1 in lease up. As Erica mentioned, the demand on the demand side, it's insatiable. These buildings will be full not the day that we open, but with appropriately. The demand is there. We're in a lease up on a 296 unit project in Columbia Heights, and we will have leased up the entire project within a year, which is right on pace. We've got a large project, 300 units under construction in St. Paul, that's going just like a hot knife through butter. The construction at Chorus has gone marvelously well. We've virtually no change orders at all. Frana has just performed beautifully. We have a large project in Minneapolis that we're trying to get underway. We've got commitments on the equity and the debt on it, and every rate increase reduces the size of the mortgage, because of what the project supports. So you've got to rebalance everything. I've never gone through that in my 30 or almost 40 years of doing this stuff. So it's frustrating.
We have any questions? Manager Loftus.
I just had a comment, and I appreciate you coming in to kind of give us an update and let us know where you're at. And I've been a supporter of your vision, and I wanted you though to walk away with a little sense of maybe a little bit of unease or disappointment in the expectation of the timeline of the purchase agreement and us having a large balloon payment coming up in October. And it's great to hear you don't lose sleep, but come October 1st, I might be thinking of you. So I really, want to hear that it's a priority, that it's going to happen, that it's going to be executed, that all the exciting things we talked about are be there. It is hard to pretend that, the first phase hike down that we had envisioned of all those acres and $8 million hasn't happened. So I just want you to know that we want to be flexible, but the extensions have real life consequences for us. So I hope you can appreciate that.
I do respect that, manager.
That was sort of, you said it somewhat well, but I was thinking in those lines when I asked what your other projects, I mean, are we high enough on the list? to make us happy?
Yes. Yes.
President White, I want to say you are the list, because our commitment and the investment that we have in this project is huge. I mean, and we've never had a project not go. You do run into blips like this, and you can't, when we started on this, we didn't foresee this. It's just part of the business, I guess, but know that you do have our full attention. Otherwise I wouldn't be here on a Thursday night, 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock.
I think too, just the fact that we have pivoted in the last 2 months, kind of in a big way, just to make sure we can get this in. We really want to get this in the ground. So it's looking at every different way we can make this happen. If the interest rates if the stability of the marketplace isn't gonna work, how do we get one of those buildings and then these other parcels underway so we can move a little bit differently, let the concrete prices come down, that kind of thing. So we really are looking at this. We're in this project day in and day out. We were just talking to the team about that this week. This is a high priority item for us. We do have other projects, but this is a very high priority project for us and we are committed to it.
Manager Sando, thank you.
You were saying you're trying to start another project
Mhm.
in financing for that. What about the project you had right here? You know, didn't that take priority? Whatever monies are available and so forth. It's really started.
The manager,
He's been involved in another project as long as we've been involved in this one.
I was gonna say actually for 8 years.
We've had it 10.
Yeah, well, yeah, we both have our nemesis projects. But that one has been going on for a long time and we as well. And we cracked the kind of the code that was able to get the capital on that one. These projects they all have a life to their own. And that's we could talk about it for hours, but the reality is that this one, by doing what Erica just mentioned, by switching over to the for sale product and then focusing on building D and E, building D that's financeable. I mean, it's an easier project. It's an easier lift. Building C is about $160 million. So that's a big lift. And that's where it's hard to get an institution to separate with that type of money right now. Building D is about a $70 million project. But again, the complexity there is what do we do with that food hall? Because that's a tough lift because of it's having to support those 200 parking stalls. So in that the parking is what's expensive right now. It's basically about $30,000, but between $30,000 and $35,000 per stall. So all of a sudden you add 6 or 7 million. My heart tells me that's the right solution is to do that food hall because long-term this project's gonna be here for years and years, but it's a tough lift. That's what we're trying to get over.
Well, thank you very much for coming out, updating us. Appreciate it.
Good, appreciate it. And if you ever need to reach out, I'm available for any, updates at any time. So know that we're working on it. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Item 12.2, stormwater pond survey data. Ms. Schaufler and Mr. Walker.
I never thought it would be interesting or informative to read the sediment report. But I just love the way he had it all laid out for the next 10 years and how many tons we're gonna get out of each project. It was.
We'll arrange a
Well done.
stormwater pond tour perhaps. So that'll be-
Yeah, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Now we're going to kind of dive a little in depth into the study here this evening. So good evening, President White, Board of Managers. Tonight we'll be discussing the MCWD Stormwater Pond Survey Data Analysis and Maintenance Recommendations. So quick outline. First, we'll go over the design and function of stormwater ponds, and then we'll go into a history of stormwater construction with the district and our historical monitoring. Then we'll take a detailed look at the Stantec pond analysis, go into next steps. Let's start with an overview of stormwater ponds and what they do. So why do we build stormwater ponds? Ponds provide a number of ecological services, including flood control, rate control, nutrient removal, and sedimentation retention, which will be the focus of the analysis this evening. What do ponds need to be effective? First, they must be properly sized for incoming area runoff. They require elevated particulate material from that runoff and enough retention time for those sediments to settle. So looking at the diagram here, as excess flow from the pond system enters the stormwater pond, it brings with it excess sediment and nutrients. These then settle to the bottom of the pond, and over time, it fills the volume of the pond in. Then, after the settlement has settled out from the water then leaves the pond cleaner. And the questions we ask are, how much sediment has accumulated over time, and how has this then reduced the pond's effectiveness? So we'll look at all the ponds that the district has constructed to see how we find answers to those questions. So our first pond was constructed in 1985 at Katrina Marsh, which you see as the red dot on the map. Since that time, 26 additional stormwater ponds have been constructed, and these are the yellow dots on the map. Now, what do we do with all these ponds that we build? Well, with the adoption of the 2010 work plan and budget for operations and maintenance, the board established a policy to study 6 to 11 ponds per year on a 3-year rotating basis. So this amounts to 94 surveys since 2010, with each pond being surveyed 3 to 4 times over the past 13 years. So all of that collected data allowed us to answer questions about our ponds. So problem statement. Budgeting for pond dredging was unpredictable due to dramatic changes in scheduling following each new set of pond surveys that was being conducted. Anecdotal information suggested that some ponds may be working better than others. As a solution, we used the district data, those 94 pond surveys, to inform pond maintenance and assess pond performance. In July of 2022, the board entered into a contract with Stantec to address these issues. The contract with Stantec was broken into 3 tasks, which we'll go over. The first was the pond data review, to compile and analyze 13 years of survey and dredging data. Next, the pond inventory and maintenance planning, to develop asset management for performing ponds, a survey and dredging schedule and budget with a 20-year outlook. And third, to identify pond retrofit opportunities, to develop these opportunities while considering the climate action framework. So the desired outcome of this analysis were to create a data-driven and predictable approach to budgeting and prescribe a systematic approach to the survey and dredging schedule. Now I'll take a detailed look at each of the 3 tasks in the analysis. So task 1 is the pond data review. For each pond reviewed, a sedimentation history was compiled, which is shown by the blue bars on the chart. And also dredging history was reviewed, shown by the orange bars on the chart, signifying the volume of material removed during the dredging event, and the dredging event marked by a red X. That analysis allowed for the calculation of a sediment accumulation rate for each pond and was used to develop a long-term pond maintenance schedule and survey and dredging cost estimates. This was then collected into a pond data sheet for each pond, which you saw in the packet, showing build specifications with an aerial photo and a narrative of the design intent, with a drainage area map to be added in the future for the gray box on the sheet there. This serves as a quick reference guide for each pond and features visually accessible data, you see in the chart. More importantly, however, this is an editable document to track all future surveys and dredging events to help further refine efficiency in budgeting and scheduling. The parameters to inform the specific data collection will be included in all future surveys to effectively continue the data set. We'll zoom in on some of the status and recommendations as we continue to task 2. So for each pond, the collected data, yes, of course, Manager Miller.
This is you've done a survey of the maintenance needs. And the one question I have, does it include a survey of the performance versus the plan? I mean, some of the, like I was surprised that one of the Cedar Lake ponds doesn't work. And logic would tell me it should be just phenomenal. What have you learned? What have we learned from that? Let's call it a failure for future ponds.
So thank you, President White, Board of Managers. We're going to get into that later in the presentation. This was a kind of meant to be a phased project.
Okay.
And so the focus of this study was to determine which ponds are accumulating as we would expect them to be. The ponds are built off of engineering assumptions. For each style of pond that's built, there's an expected accumulation rate. And so what we were looking to do with this phase of the analysis was to determine which ponds were accumulating within that expected rate and which were not. We'll talk about some of our next steps when we get a little bit later on, but we're gonna have to, it's looking at it more on a case by case basis once we determine that something's outside of the expected parameters. So we'll get there in just a moment. Okay, so for each pond, the collected data was analyzed for numerous metrics, some which are highlighted here. The most recent percentage of volume filled with sediment, which informs the survey schedule and subsequently the dredging schedule. This analysis allowed for the calculation of a sediment accumulation rate for each pond. The calculation of this rate allowed for the creation of a methodical process for survey and dredging schedules for the next 20 years, including budget estimates. Our previous process involved surveying 6 to 11 ponds per year and using that data to inform which ponds to dredge. Now, long-term data analysis allows for a reference database. We're no longer guessing. We only survey ponds scheduled for dredging, providing annual cost savings due to predictive budgeting, staff workload allocation, and reduced engineering contracting. Over the course of the 6 years listed, with the old method, we would have surveyed 6 to 11 ponds each year at an approximate cost of $2,000 per survey, which would have had us completing between 36 and 66 surveys over this period for a total cost of between $72,000 and $132,000. With our new data-driven schedule, we'll survey only 12 ponds in the next 6 years for a total cost of approximately $24,000, an estimated cost savings of between $48,000 and $108,000 on our survey scheduling. All of this information is enshrined in a detailed technical data tracking spreadsheet, which will be used to continuously update and evaluate the data to inform scheduling and programming decisions. As the data set grows, we'll continue to refine and improve the survey and engineering and dredging schedules, further increasing the efficiency of our program. Task 3 provided for a high-level overview of pond retrofit options. A table was developed showing a variety of enhancement possibilities, including pre-treatment filters, pond expansion, and in-pond infrastructure, including baffles and vegetation. These possible retrofit or enhancement opportunities were identified for specific ponds based on location and design parameters. So what were the outcomes of our analysis? All of the data that we had is now in one place and organized. The creation of easily referenced documents for that data that is now visually accessible. These documents are easily editable to input new information to further adapt and improve metrics. We have a schedule and budget estimates that were created for both surveying and dredging to streamline the program going forward. And we learned that not all ponds accumulating are accumulating as expected, and we need further data to investigate, which leads us to our next steps. So we need to analyze the categorization of our ponds. Ponds found to be under and non-accumulating were built to a specific set of engineering assumptions. We now know which ponds fall outside of those assumptions. Additional monitoring and review will be required to better understand the performance of these ponds. Examples include water quality monitoring, review of pipe networks to determine sediment loads within pipes, and identification of locations expected as major contributors to sediment load, and understanding why that sediment is not reaching or settling in the ponds. So focusing on ponds within priority watersheds may be a constructive way for us to focus data collection moving forward. So I'd like to move into discussion. The purpose of this work was to define a predictable maintenance schedule. Is it clear how this benefits the program? And are there data or understanding gaps that you may have or questions on how we'll implement this into the program? So thank you.
Questions?
Very interesting, very
Good
good.
information. Thanks so much.
Never thought I'd get excited about pond dredging.
Thank you, Manager.
So refreshing and concrete after the other topic. Scientific
I
data.
guess I know
No room for guessing.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I looked at these and I saw the green ones in our drawing.
Yes.
Where they're not doing anything?
So the green ponds are accumulating as we expected. Those marked in yellow are accumulating sediment, but they're accumulating slightly under their design parameters. So what was to determine under accumulating was within a half of a percentage point of the low end of the accumulating range. That's what we determined to be under accumulating. And then there are ponds that are non-accumulating at this time.
That's what I was referring to. I said green and then red. If we take a not accumulating. Yet water's still draining into them. How do they not accumulate? Something.
Well, so but let me take one step back from that and say, because your question was, are they doing nothing? And the answer is, no, they're not, because as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, stormwater ponds serve a variety of purposes, one of which is, we look at flood control, rate control. So they still may be performing to certain specifications, although for this analysis, we only looked at sedimentation rate. For example, County Road 6, for which we have an ongoing project, is listed as an under accumulating pond. But when we look at the monitoring data that the research and monitoring team has done, we see that it's actually still removing total phosphorus from the system in a way in which we expected. So to answer, are they doing nothing? The answer is no, almost certainly no. They're doing something, but they're just not perhaps accumulating in a way in which we are expecting. Now, why ponds may be not accumulating anything at all? Some of that has to do with, like I said, they're designed to certain engineering assumptions. Perhaps when the ponds were designed, those ended up not being true for a variety of reasons. Another thing, some of these ponds, as we said, they were built. The first one was built in 1985. Sometimes we've seen significant change in upstream, significant change in the upstream watershed to those ponds, right? So we're talking about different developments. Sometimes we have areas in which we've done additional stormwater management upstream of the pond that's perhaps taking that sediment out of the system.
Yeah, a case in point would be a pond in our county where we did no street sweeping at one time. Now we're doing street sweeping 8 times a year there. And so that pond suddenly doesn't have the loading it used to have. And then we see a different behavior based on treating the hard surfaces.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
The development that happened around those sites has a lot to do with it, I would think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, we'll look forward to the next steps. We've been sitting here.
How could something like this become interesting?
That's the first time.
All in the presentation,
Yeah.
Take a recess about 3 minutes. We've been sitting for 2 hours and we need a 7th inning stretch.
That's why. You see, that's why we're sitting. here.
Followed on the other subject.
The population is-
The problem is we got pretty dull lights.
Thank you. I needed that.
That was transparency.
Back in session. Item 12.3, Mr. Hayman.
Great, thank you, Chair White, managers. Before you this evening with an update on 325 Blake Road restoration and redevelopment. We do have a couple of our development advisors online as well, virtually. We have Jay Lindgren and Chuck Lutz. So as we get into potential discussion around terms and some of the other modifications to the proposal that have been alluded to earlier with the lattice and discussed previously, we certainly have them online and available to assist. Just to maybe ground the board again in the site itself and what, and actually I could just sort of walk you through very briefly what Bob Lux was talking about earlier. The buildings run from north to south and over. So you have A, which is under construction presently. This is Chorus. It's the affordable housing. Building B is the senior co-op. And then this is known as Outlot C. It will be all for sale townhomes. Those are 2 sites that were originally anticipated to be future phase that he's saying they could actually start sooner because they're for sale and there's still a great market for that.
C is the mid-rise tower, 15-story, and D and E, which is the commercial space. The ring road in question that they talked about access, it's already built through the site because they needed it for construction access. And it is anticipated to largely remain in about this location under Lattice or any other developer because you need access from Lake Street to Second. And it's been platted this way and approved, so it's essentially city right of way now, but to be acquired under whatever the next phase takedown is. So there is some, you know, it's a logical idea to think that that could be parked or at least be accessible. And if cars needed to park along it, it's not going to be in the way, but
Still additional considerations, just to sort of provide you a little bit of orientation to the site. And
Is that a gravel road or is it?
it's presently class 5, yeah. So it's class 5
Much
compact.
better idea than all that seed.
Absolutely. And so, you know, something to consider, and I can get into that a little bit more with the recent proposal. What they are talking about, or what he was referencing this evening, was potentially taking building B, outlot C, which is the townhomes, and then buildings D and E. So that is a shift in the timeline and takedown schedule, and we'll cover that a little bit more potentially in closed session. And so I already walked through this. Building A is under construction, with the remainder then being what is developable and what would be taken down over phase 1B and phase 2. So just to remind the board, we have the 1-year expiration date from the date of execution of the purchase and sale agreement, which arrived in May. So they did extend under the first extension that expires in about a week and a half. And so they will need to extend again, which Lattice indicated tonight they would be. That would give them into November. One other thing to note is that under the current purchase and sale agreement, from the time of the last extension, they do have a 90-day to close window. And that's important to note too, because they're thinking about if they extend for another 90 days and then are ready to close within the next 90, they wouldn't require another extension. And we may talk a little bit about how that impacts our thoughts on the purchase and sale agreement and any modifications to that. So really the date we're dealing with is August 7th, although now they have indicated they will extend, but there are additional considerations for the board and some of the elements to their proposal, as well as what we discussed at our last meeting. So to consider those, I'll turn it over to legal counsel, who suggested the board would enter closed session to explore those options regarding this particular negotiation. And as I noted, we do have some of our development advisors on hand as well.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Would you state the reason?
Madam President, it'd be appropriate to have a board motion to go to closed session for the purpose of discussing a change in the terms of the sale agreement for 325 Blake Road in Hopkins.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Manager Olson moves, Manager Miller second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are in closed session.
Great.
May I have a motion to go back into open session?
So.
Manager Maxwell moves. I'll take a second from Manager Stando. Those in favor say aye.
Too much fun. I want to.
Thanks, Mike.
If,
Thanks,
if,
Jay.
We will,
Thanks,
sir,
Chuck.
we will get through. It's just,
if we have a food court any place, not just assume that the business people are there eating. And if this is a big residential community, aren't they downtown working? Who's gonna eat lunch?
It's more of a entertainment. It's beer hall approach, isn't it?
Let's move on to item 13.
oh, we're still. oh, I
Do
thought
we?
Where are
We were
you
just-
going?
It already set down.
We're done. I said good night.
Any inquiries or ideas to add to our consideration?
Issues?
Didn't I say?
Oh, yeah, I was just kind of priming the team. for-
Oh, okay. Inquiry issues, I see none.
Back issues.
Then we'll look to the administrator's report.
I can keep it brief and just say there's nothing to it, like, I don't know that we need to get into it at 10 o'clock at night unless you're really interested in a quick water level snapshot.
Yeah.
It's, yes,
It's too late to get into it at 10 o'clock.
okay. It's still really dry. I mean,
That's it.
That's the basics.
Well said.
This concludes the administrator's report of July 27th.
No
Thank you.
further review.
We're adjourned.
All right.